I need to get something off my chest that's been weighing on me for what feels like forever. I'm 32 years old, and what I'm about to share is the truth behind the disaster that was my marriage and the humiliation I endured, not just at home but publicly, in a courtroom of all places. It wasn't just a divorce. It was a complete ambush of my dignity, led by my ex-wife and her lover. They mocked me, ridiculed my profession, and acted like I was beneath them because I turned wrenches for a living. But what they didn't know was that behind the grease-stained coveralls and long shifts in the garage, I was hiding something they never saw coming. Something that changed everything once it was brought into the light. I'd been a mechanic for the last decade. Started working on cars when I was just 16, spending weekends in my uncle's garage, watching him rebuild engines like it was an art form. That's where I caught the bug. After high school, I went to technical school, got my certifications, and dove headfirst into the world of auto repair. It wasn't glamorous, and it sure wasn't easy, but I loved every second of it. People underestimate this work, think it's all about oil changes and tire rotations, but cars today? They're rolling computers. It takes serious knowledge and hands-on experience to diagnose, troubleshoot, and fix them. It's complex, ever-evolving, and deeply satisfying work. And yeah, it's honest. I landed a job at a well-respected auto shop in town, one of those places with a solid reputation and a loyal customer base. I was proud to work there. I didn't make a fortune, but I made a good living. I was paying the bills, saving money, and slowly building a future. That's where I met her, Sarah. That's not her real name, but it'll do for this story. She came in one afternoon with her imported luxury sedan, complaining about a strange noise in the engine. She talked about her car like it was a thoroughbred racehorse, said it needed special care because it was a premium vehicle. I remember thinking, wow, she's a bit high maintenance. But then she smiled at me. And just like that, Sarah was everything I wasn't, at least on the surface. She worked in a stylish downtown office for a marketing agency that catered to upscale clients. She dressed in designer suits, carried handbags with names I couldn't pronounce, and had that polished look of someone who knew how to command a room. I couldn't believe a woman like her would even talk to me, let alone show real interest. But she did. She came back a few more times, even when her car didn't need servicing. We started talking, then texting, and before long we were dating. At first it was great. She showed a genuine curiosity about my work, asked questions about the cars I fixed, and even brought lunch to the shop sometimes. My coworkers teased me endlessly. This grease-covered guy landing a woman straight out of a fashion magazine? They couldn't believe it, and honestly, neither could I. But she made me feel like I was more than just a guy who fixed cars. She said she admired how passionate I was, how hard I worked. For a while I believed her. We dated for about 2 years before tying the knot. Our wedding was a grand affair, way more extravagant than anything I would have planned. Her parents footed most of the bill, but I contributed what I could. Her father, wealthy, polished, and always just a little condescending, acted like he respected me. He said it was nice that I worked with my hands, like I was some quaint throwback to a bygone era. But when I wanted to buy a house, he co-signed the loan. Maybe thought I couldn't handle it on my own. What he didn't know was that I'd been saving for years, squirreling away every extra dollar from side gigs and weekend repairs. I found a modest but solid 3-bedroom house with a small yard in a decent neighborhood. Nothing flashy, but it was mine. I was proud of it. And yes, his name was on the paperwork, but I made every single mortgage payment. Not once did I miss. Sarah acted excited in the beginning. She talked about decorating, renovating, maybe adding a deck out back. But when her work friends came by, which wasn't often, I started noticing the shift. She'd make offhand remarks like, "We're just starting here until we can move up," or "This is just a stepping stone." It was subtle, but it stung. Like she was embarrassed of what I'd worked so hard for. I also noticed she avoided mentioning what I did for a living. At her company parties, on the rare occasions I was invited, she'd introduce me as a small business owner in the automotive sector. Technically not untrue, but back then, I was just a mechanic. She made it sound fancier, more palatable to her corporate friends. It felt like she was ashamed of me, or at least of the version of me that didn't fit into her upscale world. My sister Jenny never trusted Sarah. She said from the start that Sarah looked at me like I was her pet project, something to fix or mold, not someone to love for who I was. I brushed it off, thought Jenny was just being protective, but looking back, I should have listened. She saw what I was too blind to admit. Our first year of marriage was tolerable. We had our routines. I worked from early morning to the evening, sometimes later if the shop was swamped. Sarah worked a standard 9 to 5, but often stayed out late for meetings or team bonding. I didn't question it much. I was taking night classes at the community college, business courses I didn't tell her about. Said I was dreaming too big, said I should be content. That should have been the biggest red flag of all. The woman I married didn't want a partner. She wanted a trophy she could reshape into her ideal image. I saw it in how she grimaced when I came home covered in motor oil, in the way she stopped hanging out with me in the garage, how she'd constantly nudge me toward quitting the shop to get a real career. I should have walked away right then. They say hindsight is 20/20, and let me tell you, those words hit hard when I think about what happened next. About 2 years into our marriage, things took a serious nosedive. Sarah had just received a big promotion at her marketing firm, and from that moment on, everything about her began to shift. It wasn't subtle either. She came home radiating this inflated sense of self-importance, gushing about client dinners at upscale restaurants, black tie fundraisers, and these posh networking events that sounded like something out of a business magazine. There was one name that kept popping up in all her stories: Mark. She mentioned him constantly. Mark helped me prep for my pitch, or Mark gave me some great feedback, or Mark says I've got real leadership potential. At first, I brushed it off as typical office chatter, but the frequency with which she brought him up started to set off alarm bells in my gut. Then, there was this night stitched into my memory like a scar. Sarah came home ridiculously late. We're talking past 11, and she was wearing a sleek, stylish dress I had never seen before. She looked stunning, no doubt, but also off. When I asked about the dress, she gave me a cold look and said it was for an emergency client meeting, and she didn't have time to come home and change, as if a late-night business meeting required a dress that belonged on a red carpet. The way she dismissed my question made me feel like a complete fool, like I had no right to even ask. Around that same time, her comments about our house took a sharp turn. My father-in-law, the same guy who had co-signed our loan, started coming over more frequently. During dinner, they would launch into conversations about rising property values, how the neighborhood wasn't up and coming anymore, and how Sarah could be doing so much better if we lived somewhere more appropriate. He'd say it right in front of me, like I wasn't even there. And Sarah, she'd just sit there, silently agreeing, sometimes throwing in a nod or a hum of approval. At one point, her dad actually said, "Well, since my name is on the deed, I should have a say in what happens to this investment." What hit the hardest, though, was how she started talking about my work. I'll never forget the day a guy brought his Ferrari into the shop. Most places around town wouldn't even touch it, but I've got the credentials and the confidence to work on high-end machines like that. It was a big job, and I pulled it off flawlessly. But when Sarah found out, she told her friends I was tinkering with toys instead of pursuing a legitimate career. Never mind that the paycheck from that job was enough to cover a month's worth of bills. She never once asked about the money, just mocked the image of me under the hood of some rich guy's car. The tipping point came slowly, like a leak under the sink that eventually floods the kitchen. It was at one of her office holiday parties, held at this lavish downtown hotel. I shelled out cash for a decent suit because I didn't want to look out of place. I showed up trying to blend in, to support her, but the entire evening she left me on my own while she schmoozed with her colleagues. I stood there nursing a watered-down drink while men in $1,000 suits bragged about their portfolios and destination vacations. One of them actually leaned over after Sarah introduced me as her husband and asked if I knew any trustworthy mechanics. She laughed. I didn't. After that night, we barely shared meals together anymore. She was always working late or out for some team event, and when she was home, she was glued to her phone or buried in emails. I tried to reignite our old spark, suggested taking a weekend trip like we used to, or having regular date nights, but there was always some excuse, some client emergency, some obligation. She'd leave the room to take calls, always face down with her phone. I wanted to believe it was just work stress. I really did. But then her brother got involved. This guy had always rubbed me the wrong way, arrogant, entitled, and constantly expecting handouts. He brought his busted car into my shop and assumed I'd fix it for free because we're family. Well, politely told him I'd still need to charge for parts and labor. He went crying to Sarah, claiming I was stingy and unhelpful. Instead of backing me up, she accused me of being selfish, said, "It's just some basic car work, what's the big deal?" Like my skills and time meant nothing. Even worse, her father began showing up at my workplace without notice, snooping around like some financial auditor. He started grilling me about my earnings, asking for proof of mortgage payments, saying he had to protect his investment. The nerve of that man, after years of me carrying the full weight of those payments on my back. I worked late most nights, partly to avoid the tension at home and partly because of the business classes I was still taking on the side. Sarah never asked why I was out late. I doubt she even cared. She'd make jabs like, "Guess you chose your grease over your wife again." But the true breaking point? It came during her firm's summer bash, hosted at a swanky rooftop bar overlooking the skyline. She insisted I go, said it would be a good way to reconnect and show face. Turns out, she'd been telling her coworkers that I just never came to events, painting me as some antisocial, distant husband. When I arrived, I saw her standing far too close to a tall man in a tailored suit. whispering something that made her laugh in a way I hadn't seen in months. The second she noticed me, they sprang apart like teenagers caught making out behind the bleachers. That was Mark. And have proof. Not yet, but I wasn't stupid. I started watching, piecing things together like I would with a misfiring engine. Every Thursday she said she had late meetings, but her car wouldn't be parked at the office. Restaurant charges started appearing on the credit card scale places, 2 meals per receipt, always Thursdays. I confronted her and she snapped, claiming they were work dinners, but something didn't add up. Then one day, while checking the mail, I found a sleek envelope from a luxury jeweler downtown, the kind of place that sells watches for more than my entire toolkit is worth. Inside was a receipt for a men's timepiece. Not my birthday, not any occasion I could think of. And Sarah? She'd always said jewelry was impractical for someone who works with his hands. When I asked her about it, she flipped the narrative, accused me of being insecure, said I was controlling her, smothering her. That's when I knew I wasn't just being paranoid, I was waking up. She began twisting the narrative, labeling me as controlling anytime I raised a concern. Her insults were subtle but sharp, tiny verbal barbs masked as playful remarks. She'd throw out things like, "You're starting to sound obsessed," or "Maybe you need to get out of the garage more, clear your head." At first, I tried to reason with her, pointing out things that didn't add up: her unexplained absences, the phone always turned face down, the charges on our statements. But the more I asked, the more she looked at me like I was a child making up ghost stories. It was infuriating. The woman I married, the one who used to bring me lunch at the shop, now acted like I was just some annoying voice in the background of her glamorous new life. It got to, let's call her Amy. She showed up at my garage one afternoon for a routine oil change. The moment she saw me, her face registered something between awkward surprise and pity. She stammered, "Oh, I didn't expect to see you here. I thought you and Sarah were, separated." I froze. My hand stopped mid-air, holding the wrench like it was suddenly made of lead. I asked her what she meant. Amy, clearly uncomfortable, tried to brush it off, but eventually admitted that everyone at their office believed Sarah and Mark were a couple now. According to her, they weren't even discreet anymore. Shared lunches, flirty body language, stolen glances. And apparently Sarah had told everyone at work that we were separated and no longer living together. I was floored. Meanwhile, I was still making dinner for 2 every night, waiting for her to show up, only for her to never come home or give some vague excuse about work running late. I found out later she had even stopped wearing her wedding ring at the office. When someone had asked, she told them it clashed with her executive image. That's when the magnitude of her deception truly hit me. This wasn't just an affair, it was a full-scale erasure of me from her public life. It's hard to describe what that kind of betrayal feels like. It's not just heartbreak. It's like realizing every memory you've cherished has been doused. Those nights I stayed up worrying, wasted. The times I defended her to my family, foolish. Even the money I spent on that Christmas party suit felt like a joke. The worst part wasn't discovering that she had someone else. It was how much energy she had poured into making me look like a clueless, lovesick fool. She crafted an entire persona for me behind my back. In her story, I was the out-of-touch husband she couldn't reach, stuck in a dead-end job, too stubborn to evolve. That narrative worked for her. It helped justify her actions. But I wasn't going to let her spin the ending too. That's when I started collecting evidence. Not because I still wanted to salvage the marriage. I knew it was over, but because I refused to be steamrolled. I wasn't going to let her walk away clean while painting me as the failure. A close friend of mine who works in law enforcement helped me set up a system. We documented everything: dates, receipts, suspicious expenses, screenshots of her GPS location contradicting her claims, timestamps from her supposed. Every new piece of proof was like a bolt tightening the structure of my case. I wasn't just hurting anymore. I was preparing for war. Turns out, they had a pretty comfortable system in place. Sarah would tell me she had weekend marketing conferences, networking trips in other cities, but in reality, she was renting a suite at a high-stem downtown hotel. I found the booking confirmations in her email, thanks to a forgotten password saved on our shared laptop. One of her biggest mistakes? She once paid for one of those hotel stays using our joint account. I guess her fancy professional world didn't teach her much about covering her tracks. But the final punch to the gut came when I stumbled across a set of screenshots she'd saved. Real estate listings. Massive homes in elite neighborhoods, homes I couldn't afford even with 10 lifetimes of overtime. In one of her messages to Mark, she joked, "Once we ditch the anchor, we can upgrade for real." I didn't need a name to know who the anchor was. That was me. Jenny, my sister, the one who never trusted Sarah, came by the shop one evening and found me buried in documents and printouts, looking like I hadn't slept in days. A divorce attorney known for his relentless approach and reputation for defending the wronged. Through it all, I kept attending my business classes, stayed late at the shop. I didn't want to give Sarah even a whiff of suspicion that I was preparing to detonate our carefully crafted life. One night she actually came home early and caught me reviewing a spreadsheet at the kitchen table. Her eyes narrowed. "More repair invoices?" she asked with that smug little smile she always wore when she thought she was smarter than me. "Yeah," I replied smoothly, slipping my business coursework beneath the auto shop paperwork. "Just trying to keep the books balanced. You know how it is for us simple mechanics." She rolled her eyes and gave me that overly dramatic sigh. "You should just let me manage the finances. Like I've been saying, I do have an MBA, remember?" "Oh, I wouldn't dream of burdening you with my little problems," I said, hiding my smirk as I thought about the finance course I'd just aced. "Besides, with all your big meetings and fancy executive deals, I'm sure you've got more important things on your plate." She blinked, caught off guard, and then quickly shifted her attention to her phone. "We're working on something big," she muttered. "I bet you are," I said under my breath, organizing my papers as she walked away. Let her believe I was still the clueless mechanic. That's exactly what I wanted. The final straw snapped when I checked our joint savings account one afternoon. Nearly every dollar was gone. She drained it, leaving just enough to cover the basic bills. When I confronted her, she didn't flinch. "I'm investing in my future," she said with this smug detachment, like it was the most logical thing in the world. She wasn't even pretending anymore. That night, I called the lawyer. Our meeting was an awakening. He combed through every scrap of evidence and told me I had a solid case, especially since our state considers infidelity during divorce settlements. He warned me to play it cool, to act normal while he prepared the papers. And that, right there, was the hardest part. For 2 whole weeks, I had to keep smiling, keep pretending, while I lived under the same roof as the woman who'd betrayed me in every imaginable way. Every morning, I'd watch Sarah get dressed for work with a strange mix of disbelief and silent resolve. I knew exactly where she was going and who she was meeting. Mark, the man she'd been sneaking around with. She'd carefully apply her makeup, slide on those polished heels, and spritz herself with her favorite perfume like everything was perfectly normal. Then she'd say goodbye, give me a quick kiss on the cheek, and walk out the door to go lie her way through another day. I'd sit there drinking my coffee, already dreading the performance she'd put on when she got home. Client meetings, urgent deadlines, last-minute presentations, the usual song and dance. It reached a new low one evening when I found myself sitting through dinner with her parents. Her father, a man who never missed an opportunity to remind me of his wealth, started going on about how it might be wise. My lawyer had already warned me to start gathering proof of manipulation, especially anything involving property. So I did what I had to. I began recording our conversations, perfectly legal in my state as long as one party consents. And I was that party. That's when I started catching gold. During one visit, her father actually chuckled and said, "If you don't give Sarah what she wants, we'll make your life very uncomfortable." It was a joke, but not really. I had it recorded clear as day. That man was trying to strong-arm me in my own home. Then came the breaking point. It was a Thursday, Sarah's usual late meeting night. I was at the shop, finishing up some invoices, when my phone buzzed. It was my neighbor, an older guy named Henry, who liked to keep an eye on things. "Hey," he said cautiously. "I just saw your wife pull up with some guy, tall fellow. They went inside together. Thought you should know." I didn't panic. In fact, my hands were steady as I wiped them clean, locked up the shop, and got in my truck. It's strange how clarity hits you like that. You stop hoping. You stop guessing. You just accept and act. When I opened the front door, the first thing I saw was them in the kitchen. Mark's hands were on her waist. They froze when they saw me. Sarah's eyes widened like she'd seen a ghost. I didn't yell. I didn't throw anything. I simply said, "Get out, both of you." She sputtered, "This is my house too." "No," I said, calm as ever. "This is the house I bought, paid for, and maintained. You've got 30 minutes to grab a bag and go." Mark wasted no time slipping out like the coward he was. Sarah, on the other hand, exploded, screaming about her rights, about how I couldn't just kick her out. She called her father. Of course she did. 20 minutes later, an SUV came tearing into the driveway. Her dad jumped out first, red-faced and barking orders. Right behind him came her brother Tommy, looking like he was ready to pick a fight. I stood at the door, already recording on my phone. "You can't throw my daughter out of her own home," her father roared, shoving papers at me. "I co-signed the loan. This house is mine too." I didn't flinch. "You want to do this here in front of the neighbors?" I said loud enough for the crowd gathering outside to hear. "Your daughter's been cheating on me, for months. I've got the proof, hotel receipts, texts, messages. You want to keep shouting, or should we wait for the cops?" That's when 2 patrol cars pulled up. I wasn't bluffing. I knew half the department from working on their fleet. Tommy froze when he saw the uniforms. That tough guy act vanished quick. Sarah was forced to pack a bag while the officers watched. Her father and brother sulked by their car, shooting daggers my way. As she stepped out, dragging her suitcase behind her, she stopped to glare at me. "You'll regret this," she said. "You have no idea what you're doing." I smiled. Actually, for the first time in years, I do. The next morning, my lawyer filed for divorce. We had it served to her office. I heard later she caused a scene, crying in front of her coworkers, acting like I was the villain. Typical. Meanwhile, she'd been planning to cash out, take half of everything I owned and ride off into the sunset with Mark. Her lawyer reached out first, offering to let me keep the house if I agreed to pay Sarah a massive settlement. It was laughable. Like they thought I had a hidden vault of money stashed away. My attorney told them exactly where to go. That weekend turned into a media circus, at least in our little town. Sarah's family began telling anyone who'd listen that I was abusive, controlling, emotionally unstable. Her friends took to social media, calling me names, spreading half-truths. My sister Jenny wanted to clap back, but I told her to stay quiet, let them dig their own hole. Sarah tried returning to the house to collect more things, but I had already changed the locks. My attorney made it clear she needed to request access through proper legal channels now. She left a voicemail, full of venom, calling me immature and spiteful. Said I was acting out of jealousy. Hilarious, coming from someone who got caught sneaking her boyfriend through our front door. The next several weeks were pure madness. Their lawyer kept sending absurd letters, demands, itemized lists, threats. They wanted the house, half of my savings, my fully restored project car, even my tools. It was like they were browsing a catalog and picking out what they wanted. The first court hearing was just a preliminary meeting, but you wouldn't have known that by the way they acted. Sarah walked in, flanked by her father, brother, Mark, and some slick lawyer in a designer suit who looked like he belonged in a courtroom drama. They were whispering, pointing, snickering like teenagers. My lawyer gave me one simple instruction. Don't dress up. Don't play their game. Just wear your work uniform, not the grimy one in my clean shop gear, name patch stitched above the chest, my certifications ironed into the sleeve, and I did just that. Because while they were busy putting on a show, I was about to give the judge a very different performance. My lawyer had advised me to wear my clean shop uniform to court. Not a suit, not business casual, but the same crisp embroidered shirt I wore at the garage every day. You need to look like what you are, a skilled working professional, he said, not some slob like they're trying to paint you. It made sense. They wanted to spin the narrative that I was an unambitious deadbeat. I wasn't about to play into their hands. I showed up that morning, pressed and prepared. My name stitched above the pocket, my certifications embroidered on the sleeve. The moment Sarah saw me, she actually laughed loudly, in fact. I caught her telling Mark, not even whispering, that I didn't even know how to dress for court. I let her have her chuckle. I knew what was coming. Then her lawyer stood up and started spinning their story. It was surreal, like watching a bad soap opera. He talked about how Sarah had supported my dreams, how she'd helped build the business. I nearly choked. Sarah had never even opened a ledger, never looked at a single repair order, never asked me about revenue or part suppliers. But now, suddenly, she was the brains behind the operation. Then came the part about the house. Sarah's dad took the stand, his voice full of smug righteousness. He told the judge he'd co-signed the loan because I wasn't financially stable enough to qualify a loan. We stepped in to help, he said, making it sound like he'd performed some act of benevolence. My attorney just sat there, jotting down notes, his face completely unreadable. But it got better, or worse, depending on your perspective, when they tried to explain Mark's role. According to Sarah's team, Mark was simply a supportive coworker who had been helping Sarah deal with the emotional strain of being married to someone like me. Blue-collar emotional neglect, they called it. I almost laughed out loud. Except I didn't need to. My lawyer calmly opened his briefcase and started pulling out exhibits, printed text messages, time-stamped photos, hotel bills with Sarah's name on them during dates she'd claimed to be out of town for work. It wasn't just proof, it was a roadmap of betrayal. Then Sarah's mom got up and gave a speech like she was auditioning for a soap opera. My daughter deserves a better life, she proclaimed. She was being held back by a mechanic's world, buried under grease and low expectations. She even mentioned a prenuptial agreement they had once suggested before the wedding, one I had refused to sign. That document, she cried, would have protected everyone. The judge didn't look amused. The entire time, Mark sat there with this annoying smirk, like he'd already won. He even submitted his salary and bonus records to prove he could offer Sarah a more appropriate lifestyle. My lawyer, unfazed, added the documents to our evidence pile with a nod. During a break, I overheard Mark and Sarah's brother chatting like they were already planning the house renovation. We could turn the garage into a home gym, one of them said. Sarah's dad was on the phone, apparently getting quotes from contractors. They really thought this was a done deal. And just when I thought it couldn't get more ridiculous, Sarah's attorney claimed she had partial ownership of my tools because she had helped select them. My lawyer turned and asked her to name just one. Silence. Then she stammered something about supporting the general purchasing process. The judge actually lifted an eyebrow. They even used my night classes against me, claiming I was neglecting Sarah emotionally by focusing too much on my fantasies of entrepreneurship. Of course, they left out the small detail that Sarah had been spending those same nights in hotel rooms with Mark. By the end of the first day, Sarah's legal team laid out their demands. They wanted the house, citing her father's co-signing as partial ownership. They wanted half of what they now claimed were our business assets. They even wanted my project car, arguing that Sarah had endured years of it taking up space in the garage and thus deserved compensation. It was laughable. The judge scheduled the next session for the following week. As I was walking to my truck, Sarah's dad approached me in the parking lot. He actually tried to cut a deal. What he didn't know was that my lawyer was standing a few feet away with his phone recording the whole thing. That little ambush became Exhibit A in our counterclaim. That week was agony. I hardly slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my tools being hauled out of the garage, my house stripped down and redesigned to suit Mark and Sarah's tastes. I was haunted by that smug voice, "Just sign it over." My family rallied around me, trying to lift my spirits, but the weight was immense. I'd poured my soul into my work, into my marriage, into that house. But they had no idea just how wrong they were about me. When the second court date arrived, I felt like I was entering a ring. This wasn't just a legal battle, it was a fight for everything I stood for. Sarah's team strutted in like they'd already won. They brought up their so-called expert witness who had valued my shop at some ludicrous number despite never visiting it. Then Mark got up and rattled off a rehearsed speech about how Sarah had suffered emotionally due to my lack of ambition. Sarah's dad followed with his usual monologue, painting himself as the white knight who tried to save his daughter from a doomed relationship. The arrogance was suffocating. I sat quietly, fists clenched under the table, waiting. Then, it was our turn. My lawyer called our first witness, my former boss. Sarah's side looked unimpressed, probably assumed he'd vouch for my character and work ethic, which he did briefly. But then, he pulled out a folder. What he revealed changed everything. 6 months ago, he had sold the business to me. That's right, I wasn't just an employee, I was the owner. I'd bought the shop outright. I had kept working regular shifts, partly because I loved the job, and partly because I didn't want Sarah catching wind of it too early. He presented the contract, the sale paperwork, the payment history. You should have seen their faces. Mark stopped smirking, Sarah's dad shut up mid-whisper, and Sarah, she went pale as chalk. My lawyer followed up by showing transcripts and grades from my business school, 2 years' worth of classes I'd been taking in secret, learning everything I needed to run a company. Then came the loan approval letters, the tax filings, the full valuation of the shop. It wasn't just a defense anymore. It was checkmate. When my lawyer revealed the financial documents tied to the shop, the room went completely still. I had secured the business loan on my own, no co-signers, no help from anyone, just my own credit, savings, and hard-earned reputation in the community. The shop's financial records painted a clear picture. The business wasn't just surviving, it was thriving, far more than anyone in that courtroom expected. Those luxury vehicle repairs I'd been doing, they weren't side jobs, they were a major part of our revenue stream. I had developed a reputation for being one of the only certified specialists in town who could handle high-performance European models. The shop had locked down service contracts with 3 different luxury dealerships. On top of that, I had negotiated a fleet maintenance deal with a prominent local delivery company, and we were only weeks away from finalizing the lease for a second location. When all of that came out in court, Sarah lost her composure completely. She jumped to her feet, cutting off her own lawyer, demanding that she was entitled to half the business. "We were still married when he bought it," she screamed, but my lawyer, calm as ever, opened a folder and placed a document on the judge's desk, the purchase agreement. It was dated 2 weeks before I uncovered the affair, paid entirely from my personal savings and the business loan in my name only. The judge turned to Sarah and asked, "If you were so involved in your husband's business as you claim, why didn't you know about the sale?" Her lawyer stammered, suggesting that I had been deliberately hiding assets. That accusation collapsed immediately when my lawyer submitted documentation showing Sarah was checked into a luxury hotel with Mark the exact day I signed the deal. Then, in a last-ditch attempt to regain some ground, her dad tried to bring the house back into the conversation. "I co-signed that mortgage," he barked. My lawyer countered with even more paperwork, proof that I had refinanced the home independently, 2 months prior, using the income from my now officially recognized business. Her father's name was no longer on the loan. I had made sure of that quietly while they were too busy plotting how to steal everything from me. During the next break in proceedings, chaos erupted in the hallway. Sarah was in full meltdown mode, yelling at her lawyer for failing to investigate my finances. "You were supposed to check everything," she screamed. Mark had completely vanished, gone the moment things started to fall apart. Apparently, the idea of sticking around once it became clear he wasn't cashing in didn't appeal to him. Sarah's brother was frantically making calls, pacing back and forth, and their mother looked like she was about to faint from stress. But it was her father who truly stole the show. Face flushed bright red, he barked at his legal team, accusing them of incompetence. "We should have hired a private investigator," he kept repeating. My lawyer caught the entire scene on video, just in case, he said with a smirk. When court resumed, Sarah had clearly been told to change tactics. She returned to the stand looking suddenly soft-spoken and teary-eyed. "I always believed in his dream," she said, voice cracking. "I turned down better job opportunities just to stay close and support him." The judge didn't even flinch. He just stared at her like he'd seen this routine before. Then her lawyer tried pivoting to a new argument, that Sarah's emotional support played a crucial role in my business success, and that she was owed a percentage of the shop's value. My lawyer, unfazed, hit play on a recording. It was Sarah, mocking my job, calling me a grease monkey, telling Mark she was embarrassed to admit I was a mechanic. You could have heard a pin drop in that courtroom. Right at that moment, a stranger in a suit entered the courtroom. It turned out to be Mark's attorney. Apparently, Mark had hired his own counsel to officially distance himself from the whole situation. My client, he said, was not fully aware of the financial and marital complexities involved. He went on to clarify that Mark would not be participating in any claims, nor would he be involved in further proceedings. Sarah's jaw dropped. Her knight in shining armor had just fled the battlefield. When the final ruling came, it was everything I had hoped for, and more. Sarah received nothing from the business. The judge no project car, nothing else. When the judge delivered the verdict, Sarah completely broke down. "This isn't fair," she wailed. "I gave him the best years of my life." The judge warned her to calm down or face contempt. Her mother had to practically carry her out of the room. The woman who had once mocked my uniform now couldn't even walk in heels without stumbling. The fallout outside court was swift and brutal. Her father, still reeling from the courtroom debacle, began spreading rumors about me in local business circles, claimed I'd tricked them, painted himself as a victim. But it backfired spectacularly. Turns out the other garage owners already knew I'd bought the shop. We were part of the same local business association. Not only did they not believe him, they rallied behind me. A few of them even started referring their high-end clients to my shop out of pure support. Business boomed. Word got around that the owner of my shop still worked the floor, still got under the hood, and actually knew what he was doing. Customers appreciated that, especially the high-end ones. They preferred dealing with someone who didn't wear a suit and tie but could rebuild an engine blindfolded. As for Mark, karma hit him like a truck. Turns out, his company had very strict internal policies about workplace relationships, especially ones involving married coworkers. Someone, I'll let you draw your own conclusions, sent the HR department the court transcripts and documentation. Within a week, he was demoted and relocated to a minor branch office 3 states away. Not fired, but as close to exiled as corporate America allows. Sarah didn't fare much better. The scandal wrecked her reputation at work. That prestigious client account she managed with Mark, they requested a new team the moment the story broke. She tried sticking it out but ultimately quit, citing toxic workplace conditions. She even tried to sue the company for emotional damages. That case didn't last long. Meanwhile, I opened that second location, hired mechanics who actually respected the trade and believed in quality. My reputation only got stronger. And Sarah's dad? He tried to save face by telling people he had mentored me, that I owed him my success, but the court documents told a different story. Everyone saw the transcripts. They saw his attempt to bully me out of my home. His reputation took a massive hit, and in a community that values integrity, that kind of stain doesn't wash off easily. Apparently, people don't like working with someone who tried to rob their own son-in-law. The house she once fought so hard to claim, I've turned it into something even better than she ever imagined. The garage, my sanctuary, has been completely renovated. It's now twice the size, outfitted with custom equipment, polished floors, and enough space to handle multiple restoration projects at once. Sometimes, when I'm working late at night, I see a familiar car creep slowly past the curb. It's Sarah. No need to wonder what she's thinking. This was the life she thought she could steal and repurpose. Now it stands as a monument to everything she underestimated. Her brother still refuses to set foot in my shop. Instead, he takes his car to overpriced mechanics who charge him more for less. The irony isn't lost on anyone who knows the story. About a month ago, I got an email. A long one. From Sarah. She wrote about regret, said she never meant to hurt me, that Mark turned out to be nothing like she expected. Apparently, he took that transfer and never looked back, not even a goodbye. She wanted to talk. Said she missed what we had. I didn't respond. I'd already moved on. Jenny, my sister, keeps telling me I should write a book about it all. Maybe someday. For now, I'm too busy running both shops, training new techs, and doing the work I love. I still wear my uniform. Sure, I could wear suits every day if I wanted to, but I'm proud of what I built with my own 2 hands. Last week, I was elbow deep in an inspection when a client walked in to finalize a huge contract. Some of Sarah's old friends now bring their cars in, pretending they never looked down on me. But I don't need revenge. My success tells the story loud and clear.